One of the most brutal and horrifying concentration camps opened by the Nazis during the Second World War was Stutthof. It was a camp where a number of female guards would torture and slaughter on a daily basis, arranging executions and making the lives of prisoners a misery. But the majority of the guards who worked at Stutthof Concentration Camp would never be brought to trial for war crimes, and they escaped any form of punishment at the end of World War II. But there were a number of executions which took place in Gdansk near to the former camp, and this saw a number of former guards, men and women, being brought onto a large hill where a number of huge gallows had been made. These were considered some of the most evil, despicable war criminals who had participated in the Holocaust and the crimes of the Nazis inside of the camps, and on this hill 20,000 people or more gathered to witness the executions of the guards of Stutthof. But there was one woman who was led out in front of the crowd and was paraded high above them, under the gallows, and this was Wanda Klaff, who, despite only being at Stutthof a year, she became known for being a sadistic and terrifying guard who inflicted pain and suffering with her bare hands. Join us today as we look at the execution of Wanda Klaff, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Stutthof Concentration Camp opened its gates almost as soon as the Second World War broke out, with the German invasion of Poland. The camp was established by a number of Polish prisoners who had been listed as needing arrest, and these first victims became the people who made the buildings in the different barracks. They even had to build where they would sleep, but as the war went on there were a large amount of prisoners who would be transferred and sent to Stutthof, and especially as the war turned against the Germans, the prisoner population would grow. In 1944 the number of inmates rose, and many of the new prisoners were Jewish inmates who had been sent from camps such as Auschwitz. 24,000 prisoners were sent from Auschwitz, and to cope with the large amount of people transferred, more guards were brought into the camp. Some SS guards of Stutthof had been conscripted into the war effort, so officials looked towards the local area to recruit guards and staff who would become brutes inside of the camp. This included a number of women, but the conditions as the camp numbers grew broke down. There was a huge overcrowding problem, and disease spread quickly around the site, killing many inmates, and also there was a huge lack of food, and starvation was also a problem. The prisoners came from many different countries, and the guards were carrying out killings and executions on a daily basis. Prisoners were being executed on the gallows in front of other inmates, and the conditions of the camp were made much worse with the fact that mud was everywhere. Some inmates even drowned in the mud, and beatings were administered by a number of guards, who brutalised prisoners. But in total 65,000 prisoners were killed in the camp, and many were exterminated through the forced labour they were made to do. Wanda Klaff was born in March 1922, and she was from the region of Gdansk or Gdansk, closely found to where Stutthof was located. She was born into a German family, and her father worked on the railways, but at some point the family changed their name to sound more German rather than Polish. But Wanda had a normal schooling, which was dominated by the Hitler Youth groups that young girls were expected to join to be a part of. She would leave school at the age of 16, and then in 1938 she went to work inside of a jam factory as the Second World War was erupting across Europe and leaving a scene of devastation. But she stayed inside of the factory until 1942, when she then met a man named Willy Klaff, and the pair then got married, and Wanda then became a housewife for some time. However, times were hard, and she then had to return to work, as they were suffering financially, and she worked as a streetcar operator. But at this time in the Second World War, many concentration camps were looking for staff to come and work, and they placed advertisements in newspapers in Gdansk for men and women to join the SS retinue and to then train to work specifically inside of the nearby Stutthof concentration camp. Wanda Klaff read this advertisement and she applied, and the SS would not take anyone, and they wanted ethnic Aryan Germans to become guards, and Wanda Klaff did pass the interviews, and in 1944 she arrived at Stutthof. Whilst there she completed her training alongside more senior guards, and she was taught to inflict suffering and horror on a huge scale. After her training, Klaff was then dispatched to go and work inside of Stutthof subcamps, which was named Proust, the first one she was in. But many women prisoners were based in this subcamp, and whilst here Klaff became known for beating, whipping and assaulting prisoners every single day. After a short time at Proust, she was then moved in October 1944 to the RUTHLESS subcamp, which also served Stutthof. This was found in a small village, and 300 women were held in this site, and they were forced each day to conduct back-breaking work. If women could not do their jobs, then the guards such as Wanda Klaff would beat them terribly, and these women were treated awfully. It was a small camp, and there were not a huge number of staff that worked there, but when the Red Army were approaching Stutthof, a number of prisoner evacuations and death marches did occur. The prisoners that stayed at Stutthof, around 50,000 of them, were then marched in different areas and directions. Some were marched towards the sea, and they would then be forced to go into the sea, where they were mown down by machine gun fire. It's believed that around 25,000 people died in the evacuations of Stutthof and the subcamps, but some of the guards used this as an excuse and a time to flee and try to evade justice. They would have known that their crimes would one day catch up with them, but Wanda Klaff would also try to escape. In early 1945, despite only working in the camp around a year, she would try to escape, but she was not the smartest. Rather than going under false names and making attempts to hide, she would return home, and she was arrested on the 11th of June 1945 and was then locked up in a Polish prison. This prison held Nazis in tough conditions for reprisal, and Klaff became sick from typhoid fever whilst there. But she did not succumb to her condition, and because of this she knew she would be placed on trial. She was brought before the Stutthof trials, in which a number of other women, including Jenny-Wanda Barkmann and Elizabeth Becker, would be accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Wanda Klaff was accused of these, also despite the fact she had not worked at Stutthof too long. She was specifically accused of striking and beating inmates each day, and smugly she would admit to some of her crimes at her trial, and she would state that, "I am very intelligent and very devoted to my work in the camps. I struck at least 2 prisoners each day." It's not known why she admitted this, and it may have been a brag, as it would have been unlikely that the judges would have seen her favourably with this admission. But along with a number of former guards and the other women who were placed on trial with her, Wanda Klaff would be found guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity, and because of this she was sentenced to death in the Stutthof trials. She was just 24 years old when she was condemned, and many found it bizarre how such a young woman could become such an evil guard and a brutal overseer. But on the 4th of July 1946, Wanda Klaff was led from her prison cell to Biskupia Gorka, a large hill in Gdansk. Dozens of thousands of spectators and witnesses, some former prisoners of Stutthof, were gathered on the hill to watch the death sentences of the former guards being carried out. Wanda Klaff was paraded in front of the crowd alongside the other women, and she would then be ordered onto the back of a truck. There were a number of guards, including an executioner, on this truck, and Klaff was then helped onto a stool, and the executioner then placed a noose around her neck. The gallows of which the rope was also secured to was huge, and everyone in the crowd could see what was going to happen. Wanda Klaff, whilst on the stool, had the death sentence read out, and the crowd jeered, and then with the noose around her neck, the vehicle then began to slowly drive off, and she swung from the gallows and was suspended in the air. Within minutes, Wanda Klaff was executed, and she was left hanging before she was then cut down. But Wanda Klaff was just 24 when she was sentenced to death, but she became known alongside horrifically savage women such as Irma Grazer and Elizabeth Volkenrath as brutal female SS guards who would slaughter with their bare hands. She was condemned upon a huge set of gallows, and thousands saw justice being handed out that day. But Wanda Klaff's brutality, despite only being brief, would be infamous, and would see her going to the gallows for her actions, alongside other women who worked at Stutthof. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.